Thank you for joining us for this webinar on digital cybersecurity competency. Today's host is the Mohawk Valley Small Business Development Center, and today's presenter is Sem Ponnambalam. Sem is the co-founder and president of XAHIVE, where she is primarily responsible for global operations, including cybersecurity governance, education, audits, business, and market development activities. With 18 plus years of experience in both private and public sectors, Sem has been instrumental in building relationships between XAHIVE and BlackBerry Globally, Cylance Globally, RedHat Globally, Centennial College, P20, and governments in New York, California, and Europe. I'm your moderator, Renee Goodnow from the New York Small Business Development Center. Also helping me moderate today is Mohawk Valley SBDC Business Advisor, Zachary Steffen. A few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to type them in your questions box as they come up, and Sem will answer those during the Q&A at the end. We'll also be sending today's recording out and a few handouts to all attendees in a follow-up email, so keep an eye out for that. And with that, I will turn things over to Sem.
Hi, thank you so much, Renee and Zach. First off, I'd like to thank the Mohawk Valley SBDC office based in Utica, and of course the SBDC New York chapters for this opportunity to speak and present to businesses and organizations in the New York area. As a small business owner myself in New York, I know all too well the hardships of COVID and its impact not only on my business directly, but also my value chain as well. So I want to thank each and every one of you for participating, and I'd like to share with you some lessons learned to help protect your e-commerce business. So on the next slide, I will start to look at the objectives. So essentially, in today's presentation, I'm going to go through what is cybersecurity and cybersecurity governance? What are the challenges of COVID-19 that e-commerce businesses face? What steps to take to protect yourself? The digital cybersecurity competency supporting your international audience, and also lessons learned from XAHIVE. Now, before we get into this, I just wanted to give you some stats. According to 2019 Cost of Data Breach report written by IBM and Pronomon Institute, the United States had the highest cost of data breaches with an average of $18 million. And it's estimated that the United States will account for half the global data breaches by 2023. So that's something to be aware of. So on the next slide, just want to quickly go over what is cybersecurity. I know we've all heard about it in the news, especially now, but I just wanted to quickly go over the definition. So it refers to the body of technologies, processes, and practices designed to protect networks, devices, programs, and data from attacks, damage, or unauthorized access. So cybersecurity may also be referred to as information technology security. So that's another term that you may have heard. You may be wondering, why is this important? I'm a small business, or why is this important to my organization? So cybersecurity is not just key to small businesses. Oftentimes when we think of cybersecurity, we think, oh, it's important just to government, military, enterprises, or if you're a big financial institution, or if you're in healthcare. But all of these different sectors, along with small businesses, collect, process, and store a lot of large data, both in our computers, at work, and at home, or devices. So a significant portion of that data can be sensitive information, whether this could relate to intellectual property, or you may be transmitting information to your accountant, your bookkeeper, or to your other vendors that you may be sending data or credit card payment information. So organizations need to make sure that you take steps to protect yourself, especially in terms of safeguarding information related to health, personal health information or personal identifiable information. So this could be anywhere from your email, your name, client or customer's information, where they live, their date of birth. So you need to make sure that you protect these sensitive information to ensure that your company and also your value chain continues to remain safe and secure. So on the next slide, we go on to cybersecurity governance. So you're probably wondering, what is cybersecurity governance? So essentially managing how the people, the application, and infrastructure interact together. So this includes all the technology and the tools, the different users. So the users could be your employees, it could be your clients, it could be your executive, it could be your board, it could be your third-party vendors or subcontractors, and the infrastructure is the technology that you're using. So this is essentially a collaboration of work culture, security awareness, and this is what comprises of cybersecurity governance. So just to also go over a quick understanding of what's the difference between a cyber attack and a cyber breach. So when someone's sending you a phishing email, for example, that is an attack. But a breach is if you click on that link they provided, that would be the breach. So just to kind of go over that definition as well. On the next slide, we'll take a look at why hacks occur. So hacks can occur for a number of reasons. So it could be cyber criminals who want to sell your information or your patients or your clients' information on the dark web, make money from that. It could be state actors who want to, who pose national security threats. So it could be anyone outside of the US that wants to attack the system. So it could not necessarily be just the electrical grid, for instance. They can attack the banking system, they can attack healthcare systems. So there are reasons why state actors do that. And now a lot of international state actors who have attacked the United States in the past are now putting in 30 to 40% of their military budget is now going towards cyber breaches. So that's something to keep in mind. So it's no longer just the hacktivists as well. So hacktivists are people who have a political view and they want to make sure, whether it's an environmental reason or another political reason, they can attack a system, and they want to ensure that people are aware that they exist, and this is a means of bringing forth their information. Another insider threat is basically insider threat. So that includes employees, executives, boards, and this could be essentially from people just not understanding what to do in a specific case and why they've done that in terms of clicking on links or, just opening up workarounds besides what your IT teams have put in place. And it's not because they're wanting to cause problems, they just don't understand why they are doing this. Another reason for hacks to occur could be hardware failure. The hardware could be old. Oftentimes you see a lot of old systems, legacy systems being connected with IoT devices. So it could, your printer, for example, can be an IoT device connected to an old legacy system, so that there could be some hardware failure as a result of that, and that can lead to a breach. And then finally, so these are the reasons that majority of the breaches, have taken place in the past and are continuing to. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at some of the challenges of COVID. So as I mentioned before, the rise of COVID in the US has left significant economic damage, resulting in millions of unemployed citizens. Those who have been able to retain their employment status while working from home, for instance, what's been happening is that they're presenting a lot of privacy and security concerns because people are getting on home networks that can easily be penetrated by hackers, because unless you're connecting through your company VPN, you may be exposing your company or your value chain and yourselves to cyber breaches. So I'll go through some options and things that you can do to protect yourself later in the presentation. So some numbers for you to be aware of. So in April of this year, Google reported more than 18 million phishing and malware emails per day related to COVID-19. So this is just messages related to COVID-19. So it could say, oh, COVID-19, whatever, watch out for this or whatnot. But in fact, these are actual phishing and malware emails that have been launched as attacks on a daily basis. There's been an increase of 667% in malicious phishing emails since COVID-19 was announced as a pandemic since March globally. So by April, more than 26 million Americans had filed for unemployment benefits in the United States, and it depends on what sort of communications tools that they've been using to send this information. And if they're connecting, a lot of businesses have been connecting with their banks for whether loans or grants and whatnot. And we've been using email systems to do that because, we're not able to go to the banks in some cases to obviously have these discussions. So these are a lot of big data that's being shared. In May, some hackers infiltrated, for example, law firms and retrieved 756 gigabytes of sensitive data pertaining to multiple music and entertainment figures. So data compromised from that breach included contracts, non-disclosure agreements, phone numbers, email addresses, private correspondence. So in order to ensure that they have retrieved the sensitive information, hackers, what they did was they released excerpts of this, for example, from Madonna's tour, or the hackers have requested monetary compensation in exchange for the stolen files. So these are things that are happening, to a lot of celebrities. And another example of a breach that took place close to the end of February is Fifth Third Bancorp, which is Cincinnati's largest local bank. They discovered a breach originating from a small number of its actual employees who stole confidential information and provided it to parties outside of the bank. So obviously, the bank has notified the customers and the individuals who suffered a financial loss. They were reimbursed. However, authorities have yet to disclose what kind of personal information may have been compromised in the breach. So the employees and the who were involved in the incident have been terminated, but you don't know how much of the data they have and if that's been fully recovered. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at steps to take to protect yourself. So just for you to keep in mind, everyone's responsible for cybersecurity, especially now. It's no longer just your tech teams because we're, sharing our information with customers. We're sharing as businesses information on social media. We have, we're doing online streaming to promote, our businesses, whether it's LinkedIn or, if you're using other social media platforms. You're banking online. We're shopping online more so now than ever. We're doing using online gaming, dating apps, people who are applying for new jobs, or students, or people who are looking at second careers, applying for college applications or university applications. And then if we're connecting with our medical professionals, we're going, doing this online through the portal, or we're connecting virtually with them. Similarly, with your accounting or legal professionals, you're doing the same thing. And also with other vendors and value chains. So we need to be really careful when we're sharing all this data. We need to make sure we're training both our staff, and also you need to have these conversations with these professionals and ask them, are you guys cyber compliant and privacy compliant? What are the steps you're taking? And also have a frank discussion with your management team to make sure they have good cybersecurity governance protocols in place. You have IT audits in place to see if there are any gaps or weaknesses within your IT system to address those. And then making sure your technology is modern and up to date and that it supports any sort of deployment. So that's really important, especially when you're trying to connect legacy systems to IoT devices, because a lot of breaches happen as a result of that as well. So on the next slide, we're going to take a look at policies, plans, and procedures. So it's really important, even though you're a small business owner, to find out or designate within your organization a cybersecurity privacy official. So you need to figure out if it's, even if it's your 4 or 5 person business, you need to ensure that there's someone specially designed, designated to ensure if there is a cyber breach or a privacy issue, that they can handle that as part of their responsibility. And also double check and see if you have an information breach plan in place. It's quite easy to develop one. If you need help with that, please feel free to contact me afterwards. And then figure out what is your role as a business owner or a business executive, and also find out how often are you going to be communicating this information to your, not just the rest of the executive, your employees, but also your board as well, if you do have a corporate board in place. And it's really important, like everyone practices for a fire drill, it's important to practice bi-monthly for a cyber drill as well, because if you are breached, especially in an e-commerce environment, you will not be able to continue your work. So you need to make sure and pretend that you have been breached, and then go through the protocol for that. And on the next slide, I'm going to go through cybersecurity governance online training. So there's a college in Toronto that we've actually partnered with, and they deliver 9 online cybersecurity courses, and it's looking at getting people trained online. It's quite easy to do. It looks at the different sectors. So if you're in healthcare, or if you're focused in finance, or you're just in a overall general sector, it goes through by different sectors. And even though you're based in New York, you may have clients that are based in California, or that could be based in Europe or somewhere else. So you need to make sure that when you're selling to these different clients, that you are compliant not only with New York regulations and standards, but that you're also compliant in the other regions as well. It's also important to take a look at cyber ethics, because oftentimes we may have people who want to be whistleblowers and so on, but that comes into the whole cybersecurity ethics component to see what is ethical in terms of cybersecurity, and even as a business owner, what are things that you should be doing. Similarly, it goes through as well what's cybercrime and what are things you need to be aware of, so you are better educated if you find out that you've been breached, because at the end of the day, it's not a matter of if, but when we find out that we've been breached. It takes on average over 300 days now to find out, especially for a small business, that you've been breached. So you want to make sure that you're well prepared to take those steps. Now, some of these courses that are offered, if you're a professional, you can get continuing education credits, for example, through organizations such as HIMSS. And once you go through the full training, depending on the organization, you can actually meet US, Canadian, and European cybersecurity requirements. And it gives you some digital badges. And the benefit of taking this particular course is you can actually qualify for cybersecurity insurance, because oftentimes a lot of small businesses don't even qualify for it. But after having gone through training like this, you can not only qualify, but you may be able to see some reductions in your cybersecurity insurance, especially for those of you in the e-commerce sector. So that's important to have. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to go through some lessons learned. So these are things that you can do to protect yourself in this environment. So first off, patch management or certification process. Make sure you talk to your IT team about this, and ensure that your antivirus, malware, Trojan software, you have A, it's installed, and B, if it's installed, make sure it's up to date. Because oftentimes a lot of businesses have this installed, but they forget to update the certificates for those. So you need to keep that. Host an intrusion prevention solution or a firewall. Again, you can talk to your IT team about this or whoever runs your IT. And periodically perform vulnerability scans, whether you do it every couple of weeks. This is something you need to be doing as a business. And use encryption solutions for every workstation. So whether your employees are working from home or they're back in the office, because we are getting prepared to go back into the office space, just make sure there's encryption involved. A side note on encryption is that a lot of people use the term encryption loosely. You need to make sure that when they do talk about encryption, the best thing is double check where the encryption keys are stored, because if the encryption key is stored on the server for whichever encryption service you have, that is going to be, that could lead to further breaches, because if the server is breached, whoever is breaching it can use the encryption keys that are stored on the server to decrypt everything that has been stored on the server. So you need to make sure whoever you choose as your encryption service provider, that the server does not hold the keys. So that's something you can ask yourself, or make sure you have this discussion with your IT team. As well, it's very important to employ a password management system. This doesn't mean you put all your passwords on, 1Password or one of those apps, because again, if those apps or those servers are breached, then everyone will have access to all your information. So it's very important to back up your passwords, not just on the cloud, but if you can, on a hard drive or a USB key, and have that handy. So on the next slide, we're still continuing on lessons learned. It's important to review your wireless security. So talk to your IT team again, see if they have protocols or plans in place. You should be using email filtering and internet traffic filtering. This is another discussion you can have with your IT team. Should automate scans for malware on network. So again, talk to your IT team about this. And review your cloud storage security. So just because things are stored on the cloud is also being hit quite heavily for cyber breaches. So ask your cloud service provider about their storage protocol. Ask them, do they have cybersecurity policies in place? When was the last time they were audited? It's important to ask these questions, and ask if they have cybersecurity insurance, because if a breach occurs, they should be able to cover that, and ask them how much coverage you would get as a e-commerce business. And then you should review your remote access for your users. So let's say you've let go of people recently, or the projects have ended. There's no reason for those folks to still have access to your services. So you should definitely check with your IT team and ensure that they no longer have access to your services. And on the next slide, so you should have a daily backup. So it's important to back up your services on a daily basis. So, and we don't mean just back up on the cloud. So you should also back up on a hard drive or a USB stick as well, because if you're breached, you can always go back to the previous day, so you're not stuck having to pay ransom. Because if if you pay ransom, then you're going to be continuing to pay ransom. So make sure you back this up daily. Again, off-site, on-site, and also on the cloud. And then make sure you set up for cybersecurity liability insurance. Oftentimes, everyone's now asking, especially if you have any sort of contracts with enterprise level clients, whether you have cybersecurity liability insurance. And I think you need, on average, between $1 to $2 million to qualify. And ensure that your policy is in place for regular behavioral reviews. So again, they may ask if you do an audit, the insurance could be decreased. If you have online education for your teams, your insurance could be decreased. If you use encrypted messaging, your insurance could be decreased. So there are different measures for that. So definitely speak to not just a regular business insurance broker, but try to contact a cybersecurity insurance broker, because they would be able to get you the best option. And ensure that your vendor information is in place as well, because it may not be yourselves, it could be your vendors, your subcontractors, your third-party folks that you work with. They may cause problems, right? So you should be asking them, when was the last time you've employed cybersecurity audits? Has your team gone through this process in terms of training? These are the discussions you should be having. And your vendors must demonstrate their security practices. So, they don't just take their word for it. Ask to see certificates or, a contact information from where they underwent the audit or training, because you need to ensure that you are protected. You can't just take someone's word for it, because it not only impacts you, but the rest of your value chain as well. Now, on the next slide, we're going to go through, continuing on with the lessons learned. Your organization has to have a long-term cybersecurity plan in place. So this isn't something you just do for, COVID, because you've had to go online and this is a short-term process. You need to look at it as a short, medium, and long-term process, because cybersecurity is not going anywhere. Cyber breaches are not going anywhere. This is going to be part and parcel, especially for an e-commerce business, because without having good cybersecurity, you will not be able to go online, access, and sell to your clients. So you need to update your data analytics as well. Again, speak to your IT team about this. And it's very important, conduct semi-annual audits. It doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to go to the top accounting firms to do any of these audits, or top companies out there. As a small business, depending on, the scope of your services, it should be less than, $10,000 to $15,000. And by just doing that in itself, you're going to see a reduction in your cybersecurity insurance. You're going to protect your clients. You may actually be eligible to work with enterprises as well that do require small businesses to ensure that they are cyber compliant. Now, on the next slide, there's a website that I think is important that you guys should take a look at. It's you should review it on a daily basis, especially if you have IT teams. If you type this in, if you go into Google and type in common vulnerabilities and exposures, it's put out by the FBI, and essentially it's an open source system where businesses like yourselves go in and say, hey, there's a cyber issue with this, there's a patch that needs to be done, or these are things where you can actually find out what are the different vulnerabilities out there, and your IT teams can ensure that's kept up to date. And again, I'm reiterating encryption, because it's one of the most important things. You need to encrypt your sensitive business information. So if it has anything related to, again, your name, your client's information, their address, your phone number, all of this should be encrypted. And also make sure you have a policy for disposing all old computers and media files safely. So I know a lot of people, a lot of businesses have recently upgraded their computers, especially now having to go online quickly and working from home. But make sure you don't just discard those old computers. And make sure those are, you talk to an IT company if you need help to dispose of those securely. And make sure you have plans for disaster and information security incidents, because this isn't the only time, again, as I said, cybersecurity is just going to be, cyber breaches are just continuing to grow, and they're over 70% of organizations around the world have increased their cybersecurity the money that they've spent on cybersecurity protocols. So that's something to keep in mind. So, and this is only expected to grow further as the year continues. And don't get on conference calls while while you have Alexa or Siri or any other AI devices on. The reason being is, let's say you're discussing a client, or you're talking about a patient, or any sort of intellectual property, or anything that you don't want other people to know. It's not just about these, Alexa or Siri data mining you. It's the companies that they have as third-party vendors who could potentially get breached, and then that information could be sold on the dark web. So that's something to keep in mind. And finally, I just want to go over a case study that I've wanted to share with you guys, especially in the e-commerce space, because as I mentioned before, there was a company that we were working with recently. They had clients not only in New York and California, but also in Europe. So they wanted to make sure that they were compliant with New York regulations, California regulations, and European regulations. So what they first did is that they underwent an audit to identify their strengths, weaknesses, and gaps, both from a technical and cybersecurity governance perspective for each of the frameworks. And then they immediately implemented cybersecurity governance and education training for their organization to make sure that they met that requirement. And then they set up encrypted secure messaging, especially when they were dealing with personally identifiable or personal health information. And by having done that, they actually qualified for cybersecurity insurance and saw quite a bit of a discount. So what ends up happening is the amount of money that you potentially spend towards, going through an audit or the training for your team, you can potentially see discounts similar to that, from your cybersecurity insurance itself. So that's it. So I just wanted to thank everyone for this opportunity to go through some of the lessons learned, and please feel free to ask your questions. I'm looking forward to hearing them.
Thank you very much. We'll give folks a few minutes to get their questions in. Also, if you want to ask your question instead of typing it in, just raise your hand and I can go ahead and unmute you if you want to ask a question that way. I know one question that I feel like I've asked before and I've never fully, I guess I somewhat understand, but you talked a little bit about patches, and
yeah,
I guess it might be helpful to explain what a patch is.
Well, it depends on, so it really depends on the technical side of things. I don't want to get too techy, and I can get you the technical definition afterwards. But essentially is if you have systems and you need to update a system specifically, and you haven't followed through with the update, That's essentially what a patch is. So you'd work with your IT team to patch any holes related to that or update those. So I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible for the non-IT folks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So you did talk a lot about having an IT team for some of these
Yeah,
small business owners who don't have that opportunity.
yeah.
Are some of the handouts you're going to send kind of address items like that, or do you want to go through some of the handouts we're going to send out after this?
Yeah, for sure. Some of them do go through that, and then if they need assistance, we also offer virtual cybersecurity, services. So it doesn't have to be expensive at all. We can look at monthly plans or be very, very feasible to ensure that a lot of the small businesses are, up and ready for an e-commerce environment. So we can definitely do that. In terms of some of the items that I shared with you guys, sorry, I just have to switch screens here. 1 second. So one is a fact sheet just on the US, talking about the recent breaches that have happened, and it goes through steps to take before, during, and after a breach. So some of the things that I talked about, so that's been addressed in that. Another one I think that's really important as well is a package that's put together by the Department of Homeland Security's cyber team, and it's essentially a joint alert between them and the UK National Cybersecurity Center, and it talks about the different attacks. So, phishing, what's happened recently, and going through steps on what to do to protect yourself. So it's quite useful, something that I think would be really beneficial for the small businesses online. And as well, another package is just a one-pager, actually, again, from the Department of Homeland Security. It's looking at, where to report if you are a cyber crime. So, and it goes through not to click on certain links, financial red flags related to cyber crimes that they've noticed recently, what to do, while you're shopping online, in terms of pharmaceuticals and medical devices, because there's been a lot of fraud related to that as well, and specific websites where you can connect, and also email address to report any sort of fraud, and they will be able to handle it from there. So something else to keep in mind as well, if you find that you have been breached, it's really important to report it within 72 hours, because the sooner you do it, the better, especially if you've been hit by business email compromise. That's a big problem, where it's like phishing, and you think it's actually someone it's a vendor that and you're sending them your e-wire, like wire transfer information, and you've transferred information, but in fact, it's someone else pretending to be your vendor, and the money has gone elsewhere. So the sooner you report it to the bank, and also you contact, the FBI or Department of Homeland Security, they'll be able to take steps to stop that wire transfer being put into the malicious bank account, essentially. So these are things to keep in mind. So those are the documents, and then there's another document on just the cybersecurity online courses that are offered through Centennial College as well. And these are all quite feasible for and aimed at small businesses, actually.
Okay, great. We had a question. So there's a lot of great information available on these slides, and one of Mark asked if we could send them out. We will send that out in a follow-up email. We'll send the slides out, and then the attachments that Sem just referenced will also be in the follow-up email with the webinar recording. So thank you for that question. Another one. So I know that New York specifically, and most of our attendees are from New York businesses,
Yeah.
there are certain guidelines, I believe New York State
Yeah.
puts out to tell you what you need to be compliant. How does someone find out
Yeah.
kind of based on what industry, what those are?
Well, there's the site, their website, right? Then NFS, what is it? New York NFSCS, I believe. I could be wrong, but I'll send that information out. But there is a website on their link. But if you want to actually go through to find out whether your organization is compliant, you do have to go through an audit, and that's something. Again, it could be done quite easily and inexpensive. If someone's trying to state, oh, it's going to be done and it's going to cost, if anyone's quoting a small business anything over 20,000, that, that's something to be wary of. But depending on the size of your organization, the scope, that's something that can be done anywhere between 10 to 20,000 plus tax. So yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned being able to potentially get cybersecurity insurance. How would someone go about
Yeah.
finding an insurance person for that?
So they would just, they can essentially Google just cybersecurity insurance broker, and you can find a brokerage firm near you that, or it doesn't have to be necessarily near you. They can, as long as they're, they work in New York, just make sure that, their insurance is available in New York State, then you can take advantage of that, because there are a lot of firms that work nationally and that actually provide services for insurance, cybersecurity insurance for New York State.
Okay, great. I appreciate it. That was the last question.
Okay, perfect. And if anyone has any questions afterwards, please feel free to contact me on my slide. I think it's on the last slide. My contact information is there. And if you do want assistance with trying to find some websites or links, please let us know. We can definitely try to get you those resources that you can tap into that's free.